The Liberals are standing by David Johnston's recommendation to not hold a public inquiry on foreign interference. But with opposition leaders pushing back on Johnston's finding and credibility, how will the Liberals rebuild trust and keep Parliament moving? Marco Mendicino is the Minister of Public Safety. Minister, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, David.
Your government's talked a lot about trust in dealing with the foreign interference issue. I'm wondering, how do you rebuild trust when none of the other political parties agree with the decision to hold public hearings instead of a formal public inquiry?
The short answer is by engaging them. And yesterday, when Mr. Johnston issued his first report, which laid out a path forward based on public hearings to engage Canadians, the Prime Minister also extended an invitation for the leaders of all other parties to be briefed to the highest classified levels so that they can be equipped with the information that they need to help contribute to a dialogue that will help us all fight against foreign interference. This is not a partisan issue. So the shortest answer is by working with them. Now, Mr. Poilievre has chosen thus far to sit on the sidelines. We think that that is the wrong direction to go, but we'll keep working with all parliamentarians so that we can do this work together.
But David Johnston is going to lead this process, and can he really do that when the Liberals are the only political party who says he has the credibility to do that?
Well, first, I would point out that Mr. Singh does not question the credibility of Mr. Johnston. We think that that is correct, given his distinguished record of public service. But more to the point, he's laid out a path in which we can open up the conversation around national security and foreign interference. And this is an issue that we take very seriously, which is why, since we've taken the reins, we have moved mountains to put in place new legislative authorities, new mechanisms of transparency. By having these public hearings, we can build on that trust so that we can bring Canadians along in this work.
You're right. Jagmeet Singh doesn't question David Johnston's personal credibility, certainly the way Pierre Poilievre does, but he said yesterday on this program he's going to speak to the Prime Minister and say this is the wrong path forward. It needs to be a judge-led public inquiry, and that's sort of the only process that will have credibility to him and to the Canadian public at large. So, I mean, even the people who don't criticize David Johnston as a human being say he's not the right person to lead this process. So how can you have a credible outcome when it's being questioned by all sides?
Again, I think by engaging, and the Prime Minister will have that conversation with Mr. Singh, and I sincerely hope not only him, but all leaders of the parties take the briefings, learn about the classified information. One of the criticisms that I have seen in the past 24 hours is that we're all expected to take Mr. Johnston on blind faith. That is not true. His conclusions were based on a careful review of the facts, of the best available intelligence. They're also consistent with the conclusions of many other public servants who are not partisan. But he hasn't ended the word there. As you know, David, he has opened himself and his conclusions up to being reviewed and scrutiny through the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, through NSIRA, which is chaired by a former Supreme Court judge, and has invited them to provide commentary as well. So this is how we build trust. We build trust by using the mechanisms of transparency and by engaging Canadians.
But you keep talking about engaging, and the other parties haven't wanted to engage in this process really from the jump. They didn't like the special rapporteur process that was set up. They don't like the special rapporteur recommendations. With the exception of Mr. Singh, the other leaders aren't going to take your government up on the offer to look at the intelligence. So given the fact that you're getting no engagement really from the other side, or limited engagement from the other side, isn't it incumbent on the government to maybe adapt here and be flexible? Because right now everything has been done on a path laid out by the Prime Minister by appointing David Johnston and saying we'll live and die by what he says.
Well, I think Mr. Poilievre is in a unique category on his own when it comes to the ad hominem and personal attacks against Mr. Johnston and his continued campaign of tearing down our democratic institutions. I am hopeful that reason will prevail with the other opposition parties, and through dialogue and discourse, we hope that they will ultimately take those briefings. And the public hearings that Mr. Johnston has prescribed for us, in which I myself have engaged with, as you know, David, we did a public consultation on the creation of a foreign agent registry, yet another tool that we're going to create, but in the right way to avoid concerns around stereotyping and marginalizing of our diaspora communities. is a way in which we can build that trust. And there is a lot of merit to this path forward. We just need to roll up our sleeves and continue to do the work.
Well, one of the things you need to roll up your sleeves on is how intelligence is handled inside government, because the report lays out a pretty bleak picture of how it's shared, how it's tracked, who reads it, who doesn't read it when it goes to different departments. I mean, those are pretty alarming systemic problems, Minister, that were spelled out. I mean, what are you going to do to fix those problems?
Well, first, we have issued a new ministerial directive. I put my signature to that directive to make it abundantly clear to our intelligence community officials that both myself and the Prime Minister will be briefed on reports that involve foreign interference and parliamentarians. But that's not the only thing that we are doing. We have taken significant steps by creating new powers for CSIS, by creating new mechanisms of transparency, by hosting a public consultation to create a registry. This is the reflection of a cumulative, serious effort to fight against foreign interference. And now we'll take the additional steps of having these public hearings to build that trust and confidence.
But the report talks about binders full of intelligence being sent to people with no clear idea of, like, it goes to departments. Nobody knows exactly who in the department gets it and who exactly reads it. There's no tracking of that. And David Johnston found that the intelligence assessment on Michael Chong and his family, it was sent to Public Safety when Bill Blair was minister, but neither the minister nor his chief of staff saw it because they didn't have access to the top secret email where it was sent. I mean, has that been fixed now that you're a minister? Can you get these top secret emails if something like this happens?
That is exactly the action that I have taken by signing the ministerial directive that instructs CSIS to brief me directly and as well to ensure that the Prime Minister is briefed as well on these issues. And Mr. Johnston rightly underlines concerns around the internal governance of how we share intelligence information. My job as Minister of Public Safety is to lead the reforms that are necessary to ensure that our national security establishment and all of the agencies that work within it are functioning to optimal levels so that that trust can be there, so that we can protect our institutions as well as the people that work within them.
David Johnston has asked NSI COP to review his work and provide a dissenting opinion if they disagree. We know that NSI COP, the Committee of Parliamentarians, can get access to intelligence documents, but has complained about not being able to get access to cabinet documents in the past. Can NSI COP have access to cabinet documents on this issue if that's what it takes for the committee to do its job and vet David Johnston's conclusions?
Well, one of the recommendations that Mr. Johnston suggested was that NCCOP and NSIRA work more closely together. And I think in that spirit, the government should remain very open to the ideas of providing and facilitating maximum access to classified information in a way that will allow them to do that work around scrutinizing and reviewing the work not only of Mr. Johnston, but the other independent panels and reports that have been published around the integrity of our former elections. But I am equally focused on today and tomorrow. And for my part, and for the part of the government, what we're committed to doing is putting in place the legislative authorities to address any gaps which may exist, basing that work on transparency so that we can build the confidence of Canadians in our institutions.
But if NCCOP feels it needs cabinet documents to do this particular task, will the government commit to giving it to them? Because this is a committee that has made recommendations on a lot of things that have not been acted on and have sat on shelves for a couple of years. Will you give them this if they need it to do this job?
Well, I want to be clear. I'm moving on those recommendations. 2 concrete recommendations provided by NCCOP have been actioned, including the creation of a national coordinator to fight against foreign interference. That's work that I've led that is now being shepherded out of my office. Secondly, the creation of a foreign agent registry, consultations, but done in the right way, and also respectful of the sensitivities around the diasporas who are often the target and the victims of foreign interference. Those are 2 concrete recommendations. I can assure you we will work very closely with NCCOP to enhance the access that they need if that is what is required, along with NSIRA. We've been open to doing so in the past. We will going forward as well.
Okay. Minister Marco Mendicino, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David.
Political leaders continue to spar over Special Rapporteur David Johnston's decision to not recommend a public inquiry into foreign interference.
I would simply ask Canadians and indeed opposition leaders to actually look at the substance of this very serious issue and take it with the seriousness that it deserves.
I'm not taking the word of Mr. Johnston at all, because even if before we might have said we do not know if he is neutral or not, today we do know he is not.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will name a full public inquiry that includes an experienced judge who has the subpoena power to call any and all documents from the government.
Instead of an inquiry, Johnston plans to hold public hearings. A key focus of those hearings are the serious shortcomings Johnston found in the way intelligence is shared and consumed in government. Here to dig into this and more, Jessica Davis is president of Insight Threat Intelligence. She previously served as a senior strategic analyst at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Artur Wilczynski is a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, and he previously served as an assistant deputy minister at the Communications Security Establishment. Welcome back to you both.
Thanks for having us, David.
Thanks. Artur, let's start with you. You say David Johnston's decision to say no to an inquiry is misguided. Why do you say that?
I think it's misguided because it plays to certain perceptions about his role. I think it's been unfair. Look, David Johnston is a remarkably dedicated public servant with immense integrity, and I have immense respect for him. But the reality is that over the past number of months, he's been the subject of intense partisan and polarizing conversations. And what that means is that his credibility has been affected in the eyes of too many Canadians. I think that when we're talking about democratic institutions, when we're talking about protecting our democracy, it's not just a conversation about the security and intelligence techniques and all of those kinds of more bureaucratic issues. It's about, as he himself said, building trust. Mm-hmm. And as the Prime Minister said, democracy is about trust. And unfortunately, I think that has been eroded over the past number of months.
Jess, what's your take on the special rapporteur's headline decision of no to a public inquiry?
I think it was the right decision. I've never been a fan of or in favor of a public inquiry on this issue for a couple of reasons, and they're very similar to the ones that David Johnston outlined in his report. Primarily the length of time that it would take. This is, they're often years long in some cases. And the classification of the information. I was never convinced that we were going to see the level of detail that people wanted from the public inquiry. People hear public inquiry and they think they're going to get to see everything, but that's not how this would have worked. And David Johnston was right to identify that. And just to respond to the credibility issue, I think the problem that I'm really seeing on this is that yesterday David Johnston outlined his own nonpartisan and relationship with the Trudeau family, which was very minimal really at this point. And I worry that there's no one that some people, some partisans would see as credible in this space. So I think for those reasons, that's really why we're in a good space to move forward with these public consultations over the summer.
Okay, so Artur, one of the things, though, we're not getting the public inquiry and the public display of the intelligence, but Johnston and the Prime Minister are offering the leaders of the opposition an opportunity to read the classified annex that he submitted to his report. Mr. Blanchet and Mr. Poilievre both are refusing, saying this is essentially a trap that would muzzle them from criticizing the government on this issue. Is that necessarily true?
No. I think that one of the things that Mr. Johnston showed in his report yesterday is that you can actually have commentary around the classified information, and you can offer opinions, and quite a bit of it. I actually think it's disingenuous and again, hyper-partisan on the part of the opposition to refuse to have access to information that would then provide them with insight that would help them determine whether or not additional action can be taken. I think that we've had numerous public inquiries over the past and lots of conversations around classified subject matters that can be appropriately discussed in the public domain. And I just think that they're reneging on their obligation to be as informed as possible when addressing this threat to all Canadians.
Jess, a really interesting part of the report, he dedicated a chunk of his pages to rebutting or contextualizing some of the major allegations published by both Global News and the Globe and Mail. We know the leaker and leakers hasn't been caught yet or identified, so presumably the leaks will continue. So what do you make of Johnston's efforts to try to address those leaks, and does that set a precedent on how they might respond going forward?
Absolutely. I thought that his line-by-line rebuttal of all of the information reported by Global and the Globe and Mail was really instructive for other government agencies in terms of dealing with leaks in the future. It was precise, it was concrete, and it was, I think, in a lot of ways, sort of final in terms of answering a lot of the questions that we had about this. I thought that his identification of one of the leaked documents as having been draft was particularly interesting. So for intelligence analysts, we go through a lot of different drafts of intelligence as we start to write our papers. And there's a lot of stuff that gets into them at the beginning that doesn't make it off into the final product for a number of reasons. Like, maybe we find out later that the information wasn't actually accurate or that it's not contextualized properly. So there's a number of reasons for that. So when the leaker decided to share a draft report, that was a very deliberate effort on their part to. My take is to shape the narrative. But going back to that line by line rebuttal, I think this is a great example for all departments and agencies in terms of how to deal with leaks in the future. If leakers are just allowed to shape their own narrative without being countered in any kind of way, they get to enjoy all the benefits of their leaks, really to disrupt democratic institutions, perhaps, to have some partisan impact. But if government departments and agencies go through and are as specific as David Johnston was in his reporting about what isn't accurate, that really takes the wind out of their sails.
But Artur, this is a difficult thing to do, to get access to this intelligence, to be able to have, permission to disclose even the level of detail we saw yesterday. So is this a blueprint for how government and agencies can respond to leaks going forward, or is this a one-off from the special rapporteur?
I think there's some specificity to these particular leaks that I think make Mr. Johnston's rebuttal in those pages, possible. I don't think that the same thing can apply to all kinds of intelligence. I think that these have been relatively specific and relatively few documents that have made it into the public domain. And I think that Jess is right. I think he has been very effective in interpreting them and in rebutting them, and pointing out some of the challenges. But if you have large dumps of intelligence, for example, along the lines of Snowden or others, the volume would, I think, preclude this kind of response. It's also different if it's foreign intelligence. I think the security intelligence, information that is more national in its scope, as this has been, I think is different. For example, that intelligence where more of our Five Eyes partners would rely, having that kind of coordination with Five Eyes on that kind of rebuttal would be challenging, because each country would take, I think, a very different approach to responding.
Jess, Steph Carvin was on the show last night, and we talked about the systemic challenges that are outlined in this report about how intelligence is shared and handled internally. And she called it a hot mess, and the mess was on fire. This is something that David Johnston is going to deal with in this second phase. What do you want to see come out of it, this second phase, to deal with those systemic challenges on intelligence handling in government?
Steph was absolutely right in calling this a hot mess. I worked in departments and agencies that don't have the right facilities to handle super classified information, and it's an absolute hassle. Everything that is written in that report is accurate for the departments and agencies without SIG secure areas that are widespread throughout their buildings. So what I want to see happen is to really address this. Intelligence is absolutely critical for policymaking. Every different level of the policy process needs access to finished intelligence products that can inform the decisions that they're advising, the policies they're recommending, the programs they're recommending. The only way to do that is to really expand those SIG secure areas across government into the departments and agencies that need them, and to expand access to Canada's top secret network. This is the network where that highly classified intelligence is processed and disseminated. And this is the kind of thing that Canada, as one of the richest countries in the world, should be able to afford and implement with no problem. But we haven't done it yet. Right. We've been stymied by the big bill that comes along with it. But it's the kind of thing that a serious country, one that's really intent on protecting its economic and security, is going to do.
Right, skiffs for everyone. Artur, we're getting tight on time. Just your closing thoughts on that.
So I have to admit, first of all, that I was the chair of the board of governance of the Canadian Top Secret Network, and I was responsible at some point for the issues around dissemination of intelligence. So I completely concur that it is a hot mess on fire. And we've been saying this for a long, long time. Jess is completely correct that the bill that comes with making this information and these systems accessible across government is quite high. And I agree with her completely that we need to invest. We need also to have a better intelligence consumption culture where people who receive the intelligence know what it is, know how to deal with it, and know how to integrate it into the information that they need to make decisions in the national interest. So completely concur. Looking forward to Mr. Johnston's conclusions on that.
Okay, we're out of time. I got to leave you there. Jessica Davis, Artur Wilczynski, thanks so much, gang.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.